Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. My name is Doug Smith. I'm an Assemblyman from Long Island, the ranking Republican on the Education Committee, and I'm pleased to be joined today with my colleagues in addressing a very pressing issue that is affecting every corner of the state of New York when it comes to our kids' education. As many of you know who are here, the governor released her proposed state aid runs for school districts across the state of New York. Now, what many don't realize is that the only new aid that school districts receive every year are what's generated by property taxpayers and what's called the foundation aid. Every other type of aid that's received by our schools in the school aid runs from the state are either reimbursable aid or grants for specific purposes. So the reason we're here today is because this governor has proposed deep cuts to foundation aid for our rural schools and for our suburban schools across the state, and eliminated a provision called the hold harmless provision, which guaranteed that every school district could expect at minimum the state aid that they received the prior year. This is causing a real challenge and concern for school districts across our state. I know in Long Island, in my district, we're looking at the potential for over 100 teachers to be laid off if this budget pushes forward. So what does that mean? We're talking about school districts having to lay off mental health counselors, school districts that are having tough conversations at school board meetings about school security. Those conversations won't be able to continue because they won't have the funding to keep our kids safe in their schools. Reading professionals, so you have remedial reading teachers. The governor's talking about a back to basics reading program. A lot of the professional staff that are required to implement that program, that's going to be back to the drawing board because they're not going to be there in our school buildings to help our elementary age children learn how to read. So there's a lot of issues with this calculation. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Assemblyman Ed Rah, who's our ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee.
Thank you, Doug. And first off, let me thank Doug Smith, our ranker on education, and all of our education committee members who have sprung into action with regard to this budget proposal. Just a little bit of additional information on this. This whole harmless provision, what this really amounts to is $168 million that ends up being cut from individual school districts throughout the state. How many? 377 school districts. That's half of the school districts in this state who will have a cut in foundation aid if this proposal were to be adopted. So, yeah, it hits heavy on Long Island and the Hudson Valley, but as Doug said, it's every corner of this state, and it's at a time when we're trying to deal with so many of the impacts on our students of the COVID pandemic, learning loss, mental health, all of the things that our districts are trying to do. So this is not the time for those districts to see a cut in their foundation aid. So I'm happy to stand with not only our colleagues in the legislature, but the school board members, the superintendents, and I thank those who have come to join with us today, because we have to stand together and say budgets are about priorities, and our priority should be funding the education of our children. Thank you.
So next up, we're going to bring up Assemblywoman Mary Beth Walsh, who represents the Capital Region.
Good morning, everybody. I represent the 112th Assembly District, which includes parts of Schenectady County, Fulton County, and a big chunk of Saratoga County. And I just want to thank Doug for organizing this press conference today. You know, last week, as many of my colleagues did, we had meetings with a lot of our school superintendents from our area and area BOCES. And this was really one of the #1 concerns, if not the #1 concern that was raised. So in addition to what's already been stated, I just want to say that the governor has taken, as Ed said, you know, steps to talk about changing reading instruction, raising academic expectations and changing course, also to address things like mental health in our schools. And I think all of those are valuable. This elimination of hold harmless language will decimate our rural school districts. And for a governor and an administration that talks so much about equity, when we're in the assembly chamber doing our work, we hear that word equity all of the time. Equity also applies in this situation. Equity applies when you take a look at those who live in a rural setting versus those who don't, who will no longer be able to have academic vigor or strong academic offerings in their schools because of these significant cuts. I think that it's going to impact whether a smaller school is going to, a rural school is going to be able to offer AP, whether it's going to be able to offer talented and gifted programs. You know, due to the tax cap, districts are prohibited from reserving large enough amounts to cover fluctuations like this. And, you know, if this is really just like a bargaining chip or an opening proposal from the governor that's going to change, let me tell you something. The legislative time frame for getting our budget done, we say it's going to be done by April 1st. Is it very often done by April 1st? No. So what happens is, as our budget becomes later and later, and these issues are still getting worked out, it starts to bump up against school districts who are trying to prepare their budgets, get ready to go out to vote. So if this wrong course that the governor is taking gets corrected, it still might be too late for some of these districts that have to use the proposal that's in front of them. By the time that maybe hold harmless language gets restored, they will already have been in a position to cut programs, cut staff, cut teachers. So it's very concerning. I'm really gratified to see so many of my colleagues here to also voice and amplify the concerns that we're hearing in our districts. And at this time, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Robert Smullen, representing the 118th Assembly District, to introduce some of our invited guests. Thank you, Robert.
Well, thank you very much, Assemblywoman Walsh. I've got Nicole Dettenreiter here today from the Wheelerville School District in Caroga Lake, and Tom Sienkiewicz from the Wells Central School District in Hamilton County. And this is a matter of rural equity. This conference last year went to 5 different regions in New York State to listen to what the people were saying about equity in rural regions. And one of the prides and joys and pillars of our community is our school systems. Everyone in the areas of the Mohawk Valley and the Adirondacks that I represent agree that we are funding our children through our schools, and we are funding our communities through our schools. And this is a particularly tough, hold harmless sort of thing that's being foisted on us. For the Wheelerville District, for example, of $1.1 million of state aid, a reduction of $400,000 to $700,000 is actually a reduction of budget that is only $5 million. That's an 8% reduction right off the top. And that is really a dagger to the heart of this sort of a school district that's the center of the community. So we want to talk about some of the specifics. And here's Tom Sienkiewicz, the superintendent of the Wells School District, to talk about what this would be in the heart of the Adirondacks. Tom?
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Sienkiewicz, and I am the superintendent and school business official for the Wells Central School District, a small rural school district nestled in the southern Adirondacks of Hamilton County. I have been leading the district for the last 12 years. I want to speak to you today regarding the troubling state aid proposal for schools, and more specifically for our small rural schools in New York State. My district, as well as the other 3 districts in Hamilton County, are facing unprecedented cuts to our foundation aid, which is the largest portion of state aid that schools receive. The governor's state aid proposal would increase foundation aid for school districts across New York State by 2.1%. However, my district in Wells is facing a 32% reduction in foundation aid, or just over $306,000. Furthermore, the 4 districts in Hamilton County, with a combined student enrollment of under 400 students, are facing a combined cut of over $816,000 for under 400 students. This is not right. $816,000 is a 39% reduction in foundation aid for Hamilton County schools. That is not a 2.1% increase. This reduction is due to the proposed elimination of hold harmless, which has ensured that districts do not see a reduction in foundation aid even as their student enrollment is dropping. Instead, the state is attempting to transition away from hold harmless to a wealth-based transition adjustment. This adjustment will potentially cripple the small rural schools in the Adirondack Park because the value of state land is used in the calculation of wealth of those school districts. On paper, our schools in the North Country appear to be property rich due to the state land. So therefore, these districts would not receive nearly as much foundation aid under this new wealth-based formula. Saying our schools in the North Country are rich couldn't be further from the truth. If this proposal goes through, here are just a few options that we will need to consider in my district. And I can assure you that none of these solutions are optimal. We will need to raise the tax levy by 7% just to get back to zero. Factor in inflation, salary, health insurance increases would put the tax levy number well into a double-digit increase. This would require a 60% supermajority from the voters since it would far exceed the imposed 2% tax cap on districts. For comparison, the tax levy in my district has an average increase of 1.48% over the last 10 years. Our tax levy would need to increase more next year than it has in the last 7 years combined based on this proposal. We are also going to have to look at cutting programs, experiences, and opportunities for all of our children. We may need to offer only the bare minimum requirements for a basic high school diploma. We also are going to need to look at cutting our much-needed voter-approved capital project that the district has been planning for the last 3 years. This would mean that district officials would have to decide to cut necessary security, safety, and technology upgrades, not replace a failing heating and hot water system, or not replacing an antiquated building generator. Or we may have to look at some combination of all three of those: exceed the tax cap, cut educational programs, and cut from the capital project. Merging school districts is not an option due to the vast distance between districts and the varying tax rates that each district pays. In closing, small rural schools are the center of their communities, and oftentimes the school district is the largest employer. No one will disagree that our children are our future. We need to invest our resources so that all children can receive a high-quality education equitably. The quality of education that students receive in New York State should not depend on a terribly flawed, wealth-based state aid formula. I strongly encourage our elected officials to rethink this transition adjustment formula, as it will be unsustainable for so many small rural school districts in New York State. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I think that really hits home on how devastating this will be to our rural schools. Next up, I'm going to bring up Assemblyman Chris Tague from Schoharie County, representing the Capital Region as well.
Good morning, everybody. I got just one message for the governor. Don't mess with our rural upstate schools, and don't mess with our children. It's my distinct honor to introduce to you a superintendent out of my rural district from the Burnox-Westerlo Central School District, Dr. Timothy Mundell. Dr. Mundell.
Wow, this is an impressive group, and this is an impressive response to the governor's proposal by the Republican conference, and I want to express my appreciation, gratitude, and thanks for your action on behalf of the rural students in New York State, particularly the students in my district. I appreciate Mr. Sinkevich's comments with regard to the impact specifically to his district on his tax levy and the foundation aid and the reduction in the kinds of cuts that would take place. I came to Burnox-Westerlo 9 years ago in 2015. When I got there were lots of broken systems. I was the 5th superintendent in 6 years. There were 12 principals in 18 years at the secondary school, 4 in 6 years in the elementary school, and 28 business officials in 30 years. It's been a job to lift up that community and to have confidence in our school system again. It's been a job to address the needs that we find in rural students and rural communities. We have about 5.5 students per square mile in our community. The isolation that went with the pandemic was dramatic in terms of the social emotional competencies that kids came back to school with, or should I say, without. The issues that we have to address as rural schools have far expanded beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic. We are teaching kids how to communicate with one another, resolve their own conflicts as young as the age of 5. We have seen in the last 9 years a dramatic turnaround. We know that we've been overfunded according to that formula that dates back to 2007 and 8 and is based upon 2000 data from the census in the year 2000. That's a quarter of a century ago. How different is our society today than it was a quarter of a century ago? But yet we've seen a dramatic change in our system because we've strategically used those dollars to build a science of reading program 7 years ago. Our students are thriving. We've gone from 17% proficiency on 3-8 math performance to 75% proficiency. We've gone from 28% proficiency on 3-8 ELA performance to 62%. We are competing with the top districts in the capital region because rural kids get it when they're led and they have the resources and have access. Let's talk about access for a moment. When you're in a rural district, it's different than a suburban district. It's different than an urban district. When folks need services in a suburban or urban district, the services are down the street. In my district, we have one medical provider, a nurse practitioner, to cover 130 square miles. We have no dental services in our district. There is 1 day a week of mental health service, and that's through a partnership that we hold with Albany County Office of Child and Family Services. We need 3 days a week and can't get that staffing. There are no grocery stores in our district. People can't access food on a regular basis, healthy food. Transportation is an issue. Isolation, I mentioned, is an issue. We have to take care of all of those needs. The schools are the community social service provider in rural districts. There are no other agencies. And transportation is a problem if parents need to get those services and travel off the hill. So I say this is an equity issue for rural students, but not just by classifying them as rural students. But how about our special education rural students? How about our economically disadvantaged rural students? And dare I say it, we do have students with orientation issues and transgender issues, and how about those as rural students? We're talking about a lot of subgroups being marginalized here. And over the last 3 years, we've heard a lot about DEI, and we've heard a lot about marginalized groups, but let's not forget about those rural subgroups that I've just articulated. Those students are thriving in our district. The high school and college credit-bearing opportunities that students walk out of our building with have earned students a full semester or a full year of college credit when they've gone to college. That's a tremendous saving. One is at an Ivy League school. That's a $100,000 savings on their post-high school education. So we're doing strategic things. We've used the money very wisely. We've implemented the best practices in reading science, in math, numeracy, and built the skills, and then we've built college and career pathways for students. We've refurbished our facilities so they're 21st century facilities with high tech and the most effective school security systems for entry to our buildings that is on the market. We've done well with those dollars to give our kids a sense of hope and inspiration. In Burn Knox, we say 3 things. They are because we are. From the Ubuntu, I am because you are. A valedictorian spoke those words at a graduation. And we've turned it into they are because we are, because it reminds us as adults that the students are watching. What we do and what we say matters. And this whole process should be about people, not politics. The people most important to the situation are students, because someday they're going to be gathered in this room talking about the issues of their day. And I hope we've taught them well by our modeling. I appreciate the leadership of the conference. I will stand with you and be a voice with you wherever you want to go. Your courage is incredible, and I know that through this process, we will come out the back end. We need to remember that it's about their futures and not our past. And we always say in our community, we're 3 towns, 2 schools, and 1 community. New York State is 700 and whatever many districts, lots of towns, but we are 1 community. So let's be unified and let's find the answer to this. If it is rewriting and recalculating the inputs to that formula, I'm all for that. And I think every superintendent and every administrator and every teacher in the state would say, I want some input to what should be in that formula to characterize our district. Let's find the equitable way to do it. That is the current best practice. I appreciate the effort today and the attention today, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Thank you. That was such a good way to hit that. Next up, I'd like to invite up a fierce advocate for students, parents, and taxpayers, Assemblyman Scott Bendet, who represents the Capital Region.
All right. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for all being here. There's an old adage, be careful what you wish for, because you might get it. And I think people were screaming from the rafters that foundation aid needed to be reformulated. But if the governor removes the hold harmless, then it really isn't a great job of reformulating. It actually ends up hurting us. I think what we're asking for really is for the governor to reset her priorities. I think that everybody can agree that our children are extremely important to us, and the last thing we want to see is any of their education being cut through this foundation aid. And I just want to remind everybody that everybody has, all the school districts have all these other issues that they're dealing with, whether it be labor contracts, whether it be an increase in pricing for antiseptic cleaners to toilet paper, and all of the other different issues that are going to be coming up around the bend that are going to negatively impact the fiscal of the school districts. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce Megan McGarry, who's a school board member from Averill Park.
Thank you, Scott. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today. Your support just speaks volumes to how much you care about children and how much you really take this seriously and how important it is. Averill Park is a 7-town school district. We span over 103 square miles just in southern Rensselaer County. We are facing massive cuts to our programming related to our budget concerns. We've already lost 6 academic intervention specialist teachers just this year related to budgetary concerns from last year's so-called gift of foundation aid being fully funded. Fully funded meant we already lost teachers. So taking away our foundation aid, even in the smallest percentage, would have a catastrophic effect on our children. I can stand here with my fellow board member, Michelle Garfolo, who's here with me today, and our other district representatives and say, please, stop taking a political stance on education. Please stop using our children as political pawns. And please look at the foundation funding and make sure that it's equitable for our children. Thank you to the gentlemen and ladies here today who have invited us to represent our children. We appreciate your service and we appreciate your representation. Thank you.
Thank you for giving a lot of perspective. You know, our school board members are volunteers, and they do the best job they can to try to work and provide the best opportunities we can for our children. Next up, to close up, I'm going to invite 2 of my assembly colleagues from Long Island, neighboring districts to mine, that their districts were eviscerated in this budget. Significant cuts. That's Assemblyman Ed Flood and Assemblyman Jarek Gandolfo. If you could both come up and say a couple words. They'll give it to you. Want to go first?
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. As Assemblyman Smith has just said, I have 3 districts who were absolutely obliterated through this process. The 3-village school district, I believe, is losing the biggest cuts in the state at $8.9 million for the year. I had a long conversation with the superintendent there. They are looking at having to close buildings. They have an alternative school, which will be cut. They pride themselves, and people move to this community because of their special needs programs. That's going to go down to the state bare minimum level. The Port Jefferson district, though very small, is losing about $1.4 million from their budget. That's 30% of the state aid. Mount Sinai, same thing, losing a small district, losing about $1 million from their budget. They're talking about cuts to, their preschool programs. There's underlying facts that come with this. When you cut the preschool program, parents now have to go, instead of, if you're working, they have to put their children in childcare. I have a child in childcare right now. It's extremely expensive. Where I live out in Suffolk County, it averages about $1,600 a month per student. And that's going on to the taxpayers, that's going on to the parents. So my question to the governor is, where do your priorities lie? We sang from the rooftops yelling last year that we spend too much money. We have a budget of $229 billion last year, and you're choosing to take cuts from our children? What are we doing as representatives and as a body as a whole if we can't take care of our children's education? I'm calling on the governor to drastically change these budget proposals. Myself and my colleagues alongside us, those in the Senate, will do what we have to do to ensure that our children get their fair shake of tax dollars. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. And like Assemblyman Flood, I represent a district in Suffolk County, Assembly District 7. And within Assembly District 7, 7 school districts are getting cuts. 3 of those are in the area of $3 million. It just blows a huge hole right in their budget. As we've heard earlier, that threatens staff mental health programs. Actually, in the Sayville School District, they just spent so much time and money developing a STEAM education program that will start at the elementary level and specifically try to get girls interested in the field at an earlier age. That's all threatened now. And I'm not going to belabor the points and repeat what a lot of people have said, but a budget is a statement of priorities. If we're going to grow our budget from $229 billion, another $6 billion, there's no reason that any school district in this state should see a reduction in funding. If we have an extra $2.4 billion to send to New York City to handle their migrant crisis, there's not a single school district that should see a cut in funding. So we're all calling on the governor to do the right thing, take care of our children first. It's one of the most basic functions of government, is providing a quality education for our children. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Assemblyman Smith.
A lot of my colleagues, that was excellent. A lot of my colleagues are articulating what a lot of people in the education field have been saying that the last several days. Do you have any questions? All right. Thank you so much.